today. And that first speaker is Professor Jen Shafer from the Colorado School of Mines. So Jen is a member of the CSSM team, and she is an associate professor in the chemistry department at the Colorado School of Mines. She received a PhD from Washington State University in 2010 and a BS from Colorado State in 2005. She's currently a serving member of the ACS Committee on Science and was a DOE Early Career Awardee for her efforts in heavy actinide chemistry. Jen is interested in advancing F-element separations technology through the use of new materials, supermolecular assembly, unique oxidation states, and controlling electronic structure. She's a co-author of several book chapters, nearly 50 technical manuscripts, and has led or collaborated on projects receiving over $30 million in funding for work in these areas. The topic of Jen's talk today in the context of our professional development symposium is time management, something that I'm particularly interested in hearing about. So Jen, welcome to the workshop, and we look forward to your talk.
All right, thank you, Eric. And I'm assuming since we were able to talk earlier, everybody can hear me. So one thing I wanted to do, but actually before we started off and jump straight into the PowerPoint, I haven't done this yet kind of on a Zoom call, but I've got a Google Doc with a little bit of a form for people to kind of interact and fill out just quickly for a bit of an icebreaker. So I've put that link now in the chat box, and there should be some questions there, hopefully, if you go to that.
Yes.
So I'm going to go ahead and
I see that.
Do you all see that? Okay, great. So we can go there, and I'll give you guys just, it's not long. You can see there's about 3 questions when you access it. Maybe I'll go over here. So we can see there's just a question about how well do you think you manage your time? One response being well, the best, largely okay, but could be better. Not so good, help please. Where do you think you struggled most? Kind of research, coursework, balance. And then anything you would specifically like for me to maybe spend some time kind of thinking about. And hopefully that's reflected on your sign. It looks like these are populating with some responses. So let's see how we got. All right, so some largely okay, but could be better. Not so good. A reasonable quadrant in the help me please. Nothing wrong. Somebody very happy with their time management. They are welcome to go eat some breakfast maybe. This lecture is not for them. Let's see here, we can it's nice to see these kind of populate in. So we can kind of scroll down. Where do you think you kind of struggled the most? Not surprisingly, as I was populating this on the fly, and it dawned on me that, probably balance would be where a lot of people felt that that's the struggle. And that's really kind of the goal of all of this, is to try and hit that right balance. And then anything specifically you would like for me to talk about? Oh my goodness. Okay. We've got balancing writing and physically doing science, strategies for working against procrastination, work-life balance, balancing mommy commitments and work commitments. I'm just starting to learn about those. Taking productive breaks, nothing there. Research versus personal time. What motivates you to do activities that don't interest you? I don't know that that's a time management talk, but we could spend a lot of time talking about that. Strategies for allowing yourself to stop working and do self-care without feeling terrible, not getting distracted by things. And I am constantly overwhelmed writing papers and having too little time to think or read. And so these are all really fantastic questions in this regard. And I will do my best to kind of touch on these. And what I might do is try and leave some time on the end in case over the course of the presentation, I left something out. Probably one of the best ones that I saw recently for a strategy for allowing yourself to stop working and do self-care without feeling terrible. I don't know if you guys follow or on Twitter at all, or follow Jen Heemstra on Twitter at all, but she's absolutely fantastic as far as a chemistry Yoda for kind of some different aspects in life. And one really great tweet she just had kind of a couple of days ago was talking about, people will always say when you have your downtime, do not think about work, right? Take that time, don't think about work. Really the only thing that I've found to be effective, and this was basically what she said, and I didn't realize that unconsciously I was doing this, is think about other things. That's how you don't think about work is, fill this time with family, other things that you enjoy. Do your best to fill that time with other things so that you aren't perpetually thinking about work. But that's one aspect to it. There's a lot of different ways that you could try and skin that camp, but that's something that I know that I've tried to do. And so we'll try and talk about some of these other aspects down here. And as I'm kind of scrolling up, we'll see where some of the, okay, so balance definitely being the majority here. Not surprisingly, largely okay, but could be better, a significant piece there. Okay, so we're all kind of in the same boat for the most part, where we need either some significant help or a little bit of help or a lot of help in this regard. So let's kind of talk about that. Let's kind of talk about these pieces. So go back to sharing my screen here. All right, so I'll admit freely that this talk is borrowed heavily from Natalie Wall at University of Florida. She was at WSU. I thought she gave a really nice presentation in trying to do aspects with time management, and I've done some different things to it, but I certainly want to acknowledge her and her efforts in this. All right, so there we go. Time management. I will say that I've enjoyed a reasonably successful career, a 10-year research group, kind of all of those things that might, if one is interested in academia, somebody would be thinking like, oh, that sounds nice. I wouldn't mind that. And this has been because of a couple of things. One thing I would say is that I've had fantastic mentors, and, in that regard, multiple. You can't have enough mentors. They will give you different perspective regarding things, and they will always be very helpful in a lot of different ways. So don't hesitate to reach out to people and talk to people. Another thing that's just sort of soft skilly is, in general, you do the best to treat others the way you would like to be treated, right? So that's just kind of one thing that still resonates in science. And then another piece of this is you try not to waste your time or the time of other people. And so you try and balance that and try and be as effective with people in your interactions with them as possible. And so what does that look like, and how do we actually go about doing that? So the goals for the day is, one, we'd like to avoid just wasting time, right? By avoiding wasting time, we're able to be more productive in the areas that we would want to be in. And then that also allows us for the downtime that we also desperately want and crave. Another thing that we'll talk about is bosses and delegation. So additionally specific skills and tools that can maybe enable this, and then also managing stress and procrastination, which was something that was, called out in general on the previous slide. Okay, so, and one thing to keep in mind, and I think this is particularly true for research scientists, is, we're all going to be some different flavor of busy. You're in complete and total control of your own schedule, and depending on how you manage that schedule, you're always going to be busy with something, right? And so, but not all of us are efficient. And so how do we try and be thoughtful of that and try and maximize that so we can, do things like maybe someday graduate, enjoy time with our families, etc., or our fur children. All right, so remember that time is money. And so as a graduate student, what are you worth an hour? And generally your salary, as I put this together, each of you has a salary of about 14 to 15 bucks an hour. In reality, once you kind of throw tuition and fees and every other insurance, each of you cost on the order of 28 to 30 bucks an hour. And so that's kind of on the ballpark of your time as far as what that's actually running you. And so with that, whoops, where did it go? Time must be managed like money, right? So this is kind of one thing to keep in mind. And then you should be using all of the resources that you have to manage your time effectively. And we're going to talk about what some of those resources are. And so if you're curious about kind of this type of dialogue, one phrase that's been used to describe it is basically the time famine. And so the time famine refers to the universal feeling of having too much to do, but not enough time to deal with those demands. And so this was a phrase that started getting floated kind of around the end of the century. And so this is ubiquitous. We all deal with aspects of this time famine. And so, one very important thing is that bad time management leads to stress. And fortunately, Suzanne Bart's going to be talking about stress and stress management, which is crucial during graduate school. But so, we want to avoid this at all costs, and effectively managing your time is one way to do that. And the other thing, of course, is that this is really life advice. It doesn't just, regardless of if you're a research scientist, et cetera, you want to be managing your time. And I will say that, once you're through graduate school and you've completed your degree and you've made that indent into, being the true expert in whatever niche you carved out scientifically, one thing that can set you apart significantly from other people in the field is actually your ability to manage soft skills and manage time. Some of the most successful students that I've had, it wasn't necessarily because they were quote unquote the brightest or, et cetera, et cetera. It was because they could really manage their time effectively and they were very conscientious about doing that. And so this is a really important ingredient to enabling a successful career. And we really want to have a fulfilling life. That's why we're doing this. That's why we're going through graduate school. We'd like to have a nice job at the end on some level. Some of us are just passionate enough about science. We don't care however that works out, but we'd like to really have kind of a nice fulfilling life at the back end. And so where do we kind of end up wasting aspects of time? So one place can be if you have a messy desk. And this can be both your desk on your real desk, your physical desk, or a messy desktop in your computer, right? And so you want to make sure that you're filing things appropriately, that you know exactly where to find them when you need them. And this feeds directly into your inability to find things or potential inability. So that's something, if you aren't doing this, that can really start shaving off some time. If you're disorganized, you don't maintain a calendar, you might miss appointments. This was something that in graduate school, I didn't have a whole bunch of appointments that I needed to keep. But downline, especially once I left and started my job at PNNL, et cetera, especially as an academic now, I have to keep a calendar. There's no way that I can keep up with everything. In fact, when I was at PNNL, there were multiple times when I missed group meetings because I just got into the lab first thing in the morning and group meeting was at 9. And so now in the day of smartphones, et cetera, it's pretty easy to keep a calendar and have those reminders in there. Another place where a lot of time can be wasted is basically being unprepared for meetings. And so when you sit down with somebody, you want to make sure you know exactly what the goals are for that meeting and what you're trying to get out of it. And it doesn't necessarily take much time to know what you're going to get out of the meeting, but even just taking 5 minutes to say, oh yeah, I'd like to get this, I'd like to get this, because the number of times you can walk out of the office and say, forgot, oh yeah, I was going to ask Dr. Shafer about this, or et cetera, then that just creates kind of unnecessary chaos in trying to manage that. So make sure to take some time to prepare for your meetings. And this can all lead to a stage potentially, if you're kind of dealing with all of these things, being tired or unable to concentrate, right? And so that feeds into personal care and sleep. And so this will be an interesting exercise. We'll talk more about the importance of sleep, et cetera, but that's another place where things can kind of get away from you in your day. And so another really important thing is being successful doesn't make you manage your time well. Managing your time well makes you successful. And so make sure that you're running forward with this and actually setting your day up for success. And that's going to start matriculating through in a lot of different aspects in your life. And so let's talk about goals, priorities, and planning. And you might notice that there are some humorous things to help break up some of the soft skills aspect. And so you want to make sure that you aren't losing your socks. All right. Make sure that you know, why are you doing this? What is the goal? That's sort of the first thing. If you are in the middle of doing something and you realize, well, this is completely silly, maybe it's time to evaluate why you were doing this. And so be attentive to those sorts of pieces. Why will I succeed at this? So one important piece as you're planning out things is make sure that you have a sense of why you will succeed in this direction. And if you don't have a good sense of that, that's a time to stop and ask questions as opposed to spinning your wheels. So specific to graduate students, there's lots of different ways to skin this cat. If you get stuck, you can reach out to advisor, you can reach out to senior graduate students or even peers within your research group. But being confused doesn't always necessarily absolve itself in a vacuum. You might be able to figure some stuff out if you take some time to think about it, but you're really a part of a research net when you join graduate school, and I would encourage you all to use that net as much as possible. So another thing that is very helpful when you're going through and deciding to do different things is what happens if I choose not to do it. Maybe the thing that you thought was pretty important wasn't so important after all. Or another way to think about this is what happens if I choose not to do it at this time, right? And so when you're trying to balance the idea of research versus coursework, that's one track that you can use to try and figure things out is, okay, is it urgent? Or is it something that can maybe be put off for a moment? Not that I'm trying to encourage procrastinating, but we unfortunately can all really only do one thing at a time. And then another thing that can be really important is doing things right versus doing the right thing. So keeping in mind that it's much more helpful to you if you really do things correctly the first time, especially in lab, as opposed to trying to redo the experiment multiple times. And so trying to be careful and deliberate in those aspects. So, all right. So planning. Failing to plan is planning to fail. And that's sort of a militarism that's frequently used in the military, but it really is true. And it doesn't take as much time to plan as you might think. And actually that's I've got a little bit of a longer drive into work, maybe on the order of 15 minutes. Not everybody has that, but you can take some time even kind of in that drive or when you're commuting, maybe you walk to school, etc., to just, okay, what are my goals for the day? What do I want to accomplish? One thing that really helped me when I was a graduate student was to not spend significant time in front of the computer right when I got in the door. If I knew that I needed to kind of get in, do some lab work, I would drop my things off, put my lunch in the fridge, whatever, and just get straight into lab. And that was something that was extremely helpful in getting research going for the day. And even when I was still getting to lab a little bit as a professor, that was the only way I was going to be successful in getting into the lab, was basically not spending much time at all in front of my desk. So plan each day, each week, each semester. And so a lot of times, your interactions with your research advisors will look different, but sometimes I'll have meetings with my students, and in that, over the course of those meetings, one thing that's really helpful is that you can sit down and sort of course out, okay, well, what are my goals for the week, for the month? What are we trying to head towards? And you can actually get some feedback on, does that plan look effective? And not saying that you necessarily have to have your advisor to do this, but it's a helpful thing if you have any form of regular meeting with them that you can touch base, or like I said, senior graduate students, however your mentorship network looks for you. And then one thing that's super important about this is you can always change your plan, but only once you have one. I have no compunctions about changing plans. Like, it's okay, it happened, we're gonna change course on this, but you have to be working towards something. And probably one of the most successful things is at least have a sense of where you're heading towards. And if things start to shift or pivot, then you rebuild your plan and you go to that direction. But if you weren't necessarily planning on having an effective roadmap for the week, then it wasn't obvious where you were going to end up anyways. And so this is really quite crucial. All right. So, to-do list. Make sure you get everything done. All right. break things down into small steps. Okay, so this kind of brings me to when we were looking at the Google form, there was a question there. Whoops. There was a question there at the beginning, which was talking about how to basically not procrastinate. All right, cool. So this is a really, really helpful way in not procrastinating. Go back to sharing my screen. Maybe. There we go. Okay. So to-do lists are basically going to be your most effective way in breaking the dam against procrastination. Not only making them, but just starting to break things down into small steps. So fortunately, I was kind of wired in a way that if I was anxious about getting something started, I would just start working on it. And that was something for me that I found helped really manage anxiety, as opposed to still kind of thinking about it, just continuing to get more anxious until, oh, it's due tomorrow. If there's something that's starting to make you anxious, start doing some things to start working on it. And you'll notice, at least in general, that anxiety will start to drop down, or at least it does for me. So start just chipping away at stuff, figuring out what you can do. One of the most important things in graduate school to keep in mind is it's definitely a marathon and not a sprint. And that goes for not only graduate school, for your career after graduate school. Especially in science, people can pick something like a 20-year arc of what they would like to accomplish over the course of their scientific career. What is something that they would slowly like to chip away at? And you can kind of start that process as a graduate student of, okay, this is my goal for today. And so it's really important to stay present and work on the things that you can actually do today. And so in this regard, if you haven't been doing this, this is kind of like learning a new skill. So just kind of start working on that, try and figure out ways that you can start slowly chipping away at stuff to be making progress. And like I was kind of saying earlier, if there's something that's giving you a little bit of anxiety or doesn't seem particularly fun, do the ugliest thing first. And so this kind of talks, and I think somebody had a question in there about how do you basically get the intestinal fortitude to do stuff that you don't like, right? That's kind of, if it's something that's not particularly painful or particularly intensive, I have a mentality to just kind of rip the Band-Aid off, because for me, I would much rather get that thing out of the way and not be worried about it, as opposed to continuing to, okay, that's kind of bugging me, and it's kind of on your mind, and you just would be better if it was actually done. So that's one way that and one reason that I sort of address things that are sometimes, not very much fun. Sometimes the things that you don't want to do take a lot more than just maybe sending an email or doing something really small that can be taken care of quickly. And in that instance, it's basically you have to kind of remind yourself the reason that you're doing it. And if you don't have a good reason for doing it, then maybe you should take a time to reassess why this is on your to-do list in the first place, if there's not a particularly good reason for that. And so that kind of gets into justifications, etc. But that's usually how I try and manage stuff that I don't want to do, is I basically try and get it done as soon as possible, so that way it's just not bugging me and I don't keep thinking about it. All right, so one thing, and many of you have probably seen this, but this is Covey's 4-quadrant to-do list. And this is hopefully a tool that can kind of help you with decision making and taking stuff out. So you can see that there's kind of over here this important and not important, and then there's this due soon and not due soon kind of, okay? And so you have things that are important but not due soon, not important, etc. So let's kind of march through this. So if you have, what do you think is the most important thing to get done here? So if you were to rack and stack things to get done for your day, what do you think you would do? The important due soon, important not due soon, etc. Kind of mentally think about this and we will progress. If you said important due soon, then you are correct. That's hopefully the easy one. And then what's the least important thing to do, right? Kind of think about what that might be in the quadrant. And if you were the lower right-hand corner, then you are correct. All right, so those are the fairly, right, not important, not due soon, don't even worry about it, important, due soon, you got to do it. It's actually kind of this gray area that people maybe, do soon, but not important, important, not due soon. And so how do you actually treat this? And so it turns out that the important, you always do the thing that's important. If it's not important, you don't need to worry about doing it. And so go ahead and keep that in mind. Make sure that you're accomplishing your important things. And if things are not important, then really the question is, why are you doing them? And so that's something to be thinking about. And so what are things that kind of fall into these various categories, and what categories should you be living in? And so ideally, in the perfect world, which none of us live in, you are spending the majority of your time in this important but not urgent category, right? You're forward thinking, you're looking at, and this leaves time for kind of relationship building, potentially recognizing new opportunities, potentially planning recreation. And as a consequence of this, if you're able to spend the majority of your time in this important, not urgent category, what you end up is with a nice vision and perspective, a healthy balance, reasonable discipline, and fewer crises, right? However, many of us operate in the urgent plus important category, right? And so here's where anxiety and pressure, et cetera, builds in, right? You've got crisis, you're basically deadline driven, and your results on this are stress, burnout, crisis management, and then you're always putting out fires. All right, so quadrant 3, so these are urgent but not important. What things kind of fall into this? So frequently these are things kind of like interruptions, some callers, depending on if you pick up your phone that much. I do screen calls. Usually I feel like there's about 5 different ways to get a hold of me. And so if it's important, they're probably going to get a hold of me through one of those other vehicles. Everybody has a different relationship within their research group and professionally about how they want to balance things and interactions. But I try and spend as much time sort of in this important, not urgent quadrant, such that it's not crucial if I miss a phone call, right? And so having said that, obviously I pick up my phone for different things and there are different consequences. So some meetings can kind of fall in this. The faculty on the call, certainly this resonates with them. Proximate pressing matters, popular activities, etc. And so one thing, if you're spending a lot of time in quad 3, right, this can result in short-term focus, especially if you're perpetually having a lot of interruptions in the office. And this is a really big challenge, especially in graduate school, right? Frequently, you guys don't have a great office all by yourself, right? You're usually in some sort of cubicle quadrant, or you're sharing an office with 5 or 6 other people. And so, there's a lot of different ways that you can try and manage and prioritize interruptions in your space. I know plenty of people that kind of have headphones in to try and, minimize when the door opens, they're paying attention to that, etc. So, but I think one thing perhaps to be attentive to is recognizing that, the reality is a lot of time your grad student office space is suboptimal for interruptions and progress. And so, there's a couple of ways. One, figure out how to maybe make that space more usable for you as far as minimizing interruptions. Or, maybe there's other places in campus, a coffee shop, etc., where you actually might be more productive, and there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's completely normal if you need to spend your time somewhere else to get some things accomplished. I know plenty of professors that, operate in different spaces. In fact, one prominent professor frequently that I know would write things like her EFRC proposal, etc., in her hotel room. She'd go somewhere, she'd tell people she was kind of off somewhere else, she'd go there and actually write in her hotel room so she wasn't getting busy and distracted with a lot of different things. So there's nothing wrong with that. It's something that we all need to balance. And then quad 4, right, this is the place where you don't want to be, if you're doing a lot of not important, not urgent stuff, this is you're gonna have issues with, you know, potential job, dependability, and, you know, it's not gonna be fun. So try and spend as much time here as you can, and that requires some forward planning. All right. All right, so paperwork, right? This is one pitfall as far as managing things. So, you know, clutter is basically death. It kind of leads to thrashing about not being able to find things. It's really important to keep your desk clear and focus on one thing at a time. And I will say that it's not, for me, it's not so important if my physical desk is a little bit messy, because I don't operate where my physical space is particularly clean all the time. I'm kind of messy in that way. But if my desktop, my computer desktop is messy, I'm not going to find anything. And so figure out what's important to you and make sure that you've got an organizational system that works. Really, ideally, you're only touching each piece of paper once if you're kind of managing some different things, especially this comes to emails, etc. You don't want to be handling a lot of this stuff all over the place. One thing to keep in mind is your inbox is not your to-do list necessarily, right? So, and what is meant by that is people have a tendency to sometimes respond to the most urgent thing within the inbox. It's okay to prioritize stuff within that inbox and address it. The other thing is, what's meant by this is your email is not necessarily the most important thing that you have going on, right? We get, especially some of the professors on the call, we could probably spend all day on our email, but you know, there are other things. Make sure that you step away from that and you appreciate what your original goal was for the day to kind of refocus and address that. So since I'm in Los Alamos, I couldn't take a picture of my desk, but so we've got a picture of Natalie's Wall's desk at WSU, and you can see that it's reasonably tidy. And one thing that Natalie swears by, and I actually haven't committed to this, is the idea of using multiple monitors. Right now I just kind of have one big monitor, but she swears by it and makes the argument, you know, monitors are cheap. You can get them for, you know, $50, $100. It's a really cheap, and frequently you can find them for free just kind of laying around. And so get multiple monitors, set them up on your desk, and it will make things like writing papers, your dissertation, working on figures, etc., much easier. And so, like I said, I can't testify to that explicitly, but it's something that she absolutely swears by. So part of the reason for that is I don't like to actually have a big desk, because if I have a big desk, paperwork piles up on it. So that's one way that I avoid paperwork, is I just don't have a desk big enough to allow for that. And so you can see that basically there's a lot of different things kind of going on here. And basically each monitor has something that's kind of working around in the background for various stuff. This is disgusting. This is foul. You know who you are leaving your desk like this. So this is actually probably how my desk looked the majority of time in graduate school. But try and keep this clutter-free as much as possible. Right, so you can actually generate a to-do list in Outlook. If you guys use Outlook, I haven't seen this as much. A lot of, for example, I know at Mines, the students are on Gmail. There's a lot of different ways that you can generate to-do lists. And so you try and get things listed and manage that way. When I was a graduate student, frankly, a lot of times I just wrote down stuff on a sheet of paper, kind of what I wanted to get done for the day, and I would cross it out. So that's one way that you can manage these things. Another thing is, if you do use Outlook, I find the search function on it absolutely deplorable, and it turns up everything that I'm not interested in. And so, you know, folders can be really important to getting this done. And actually, one thing that changed my ability to be very effective in responding to emails is I actually, even though your email is not your to-do list, I do have a to-do email folder. And it absolutely drives me nuts to have, you know, 30 emails that are unread. It's whatever, a tick of mine. And so I will, quote unquote, read them, but just slide them over to that to-do folder. And then I know that they are there waiting for me to address at some other point. And it's helped significantly in just my response to emails, etc. So that's one thing, if you notice that you're kind of struggling with that, works well for me. All right. And okay. Keeping a calendar is another art form in and of itself. You can see that I'm perfecting this art form based on the number of times that I am double or even quadruple booked. I don't know what happened on Tuesday. But this is something, like I was kind of saying, you know, in the day and age of smartphones and having calendar reminders, one thing that I would counsel for, as opposed to what I do, you know, only actually have things on your calendar that you are committed to, as opposed to just kind of random floating things. You can see that I have things in orange, and those are the actual and really important things so that I don't forget them, like this presentation today. But so figure out a system regarding your calendar, especially if you have lots of appointments to try and keep, and that will be very helpful. And also planning for your day, because you can just look at your calendar and say, oh yeah, that's basically what I have going on today, and this is how I can kind of use the in-between times. All right, telephone, and especially now video conferences, since we are doing these things. So for those of us that are camming, like this dog right here. Okay. Always try and keep calls short if you can. Natalie actually recommends standing during the call. It kind of keeps you moving around a little bit, and I think that that's actually a good idea. And actually, if you want a standing desk, or you can figure out how to get one of those can be really helpful in kind of keeping you awake and moving. I definitely encourage them. If you're on some sort of big meeting call, you want to start by announcing the goals for the call. What are you trying to get done? Especially if this is a big group of people, especially say graduate student government, right? You could be wasting a lot of time if you don't know what you were trying to get done for that meeting. You don't really want to be getting too comfortable in your call. Don't be putting your feet up. So make sure that you know what you want to get out of the call. That way you can move on to the rest of the day. Now, say that the call is kind of running long. How do you deal with this? It's always nice to have something in view to do next. And one way that you can always politely end a conversation is, I have someone waiting for me. This is completely acceptable. Use this to your advantage. All right, office logistics. So one thing is your goal is to make your office comfortable for you and optionally comfortable for others. And so in your graduate student office, it may seem like a great idea to have a big comfortable couch in there, but it might be interesting to think about how much time people are spending in that big comfortable couch that are maybe, you know, taking time away from what you're trying to get done. And so Natalie's cruel enough to just have folding chairs. As apparently some people cut the legs off their chairs. I admit that I do have a couch in my office, but you know, it's something to think about if you're finding that people are spending a lot of time in your office and you don't want them to be. That's one way to address that potentially. So scheduling yourself. Okay, you don't find time for important things. You make it. And this kind of gets back into doing the thing that you don't want to do. If it's presumably important, you know, kind of, if it's not important, then you don't need to worry about it. But if it's an important thing that you don't want to do, you need to kind of find the time, whether you just kind of do it, you know, to get it done with, rip the Band-Aid off, or, you know, schedule some time for it. You really need to make sure that you block that time off. Some people use their calendar to actually build and develop their day. So it's not just for meetings, but it's, I'm trying to run this titration here in the morning. I would like to do this crystallization in the afternoon, or at least set it up. You know, that's one way that you can especially use your calendar to kind of build out your week. It's a tool, you've got it for yourself, and then it's basically done. Keep in mind that everything you do has an opportunity cost. You know, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, we can't divide ourselves up into two people. And so you really need to think what you're missing out on if you take something on and balance that. And then one thing that's pretty important to say is learning how to say no. And kind of, here were some funny ways to say no that I found. And I'm open to some of your favorites. I did laugh out loud at the I'd rather swallow a pillow, and my wife really does not like the chain smokers, so I thought number 3 was particularly good. I also work out at the gym, so I feel like 4 I can use pretty easily. Okay. And another thing for this, don't apologize. You don't need to apologize for saying no. Your schedule's booked. We're all busy. If you've gone through the legwork to figure out, this isn't something that I want to do, you don't have to do it, okay? So this is not something that you need to apologize for. Now, how do you maybe say gentle no's as opposed to some of the ones that I was offering earlier? So one way you can say this is, I'll do it if nobody else steps forward, or I'll be your deep fallback, but you must keep searching. And I've definitely pulled that one a couple of times. Natalie highlighted moving parties in graduate school as a potential time sink. And then there's kind of always the chatty friend. You know, maybe you are committed to this lifestyle of time management and efficiency so that you can go on and have this great work-life balance, but maybe chatty friend is less so. And so a good way to go is, you know, really sorry, I got to get this experiment going, or I, as your advisor, or if I was your advisor, will always be happy if you want to use my name to get out of a chatty friend situation. I have a meeting with my advisor. I got to go. So those are just kind of a couple of ways if you find that you're kind of getting trapped into some conversations and etc. All right. So one other thing to keep in mind is that everyone has good and bad times. All right. So it's really important for you to find your creative thinking time, defend it ruthlessly, and spend it alone, maybe at home. And so for me, I know that my mornings are much more effective writing, right? There's kind of a couple of different times when I'm good at writing. I'm a terrible writer at night. I know many people who wrote their entire dissertation from the hours of, 9 to 3 in the morning, right? Everybody has different times and there's Sessler, he's saying, yes, that's how I live. Figure out when you work effectively and really build your day around that. And so this can be another way. Somebody was asking me about the balance between spending time writing about science and spending time doing science. If you find that you can maybe find an hour a day to kind of get some things outlined, worked on, etc., maybe this is the way to do it. For me, like I said earlier, I was basically much more effective in lab if I just went straight into lab. And so figure out what works for you and build your day basically around that. Another point, since somebody had asked about writing, is basically there is a balance to that. One thing that has been recommended to me, and I encourage all of my students to do this, is basically as you get an experiment written up or developed and it looks good, take the time to write up that. Do your writing in little pieces, and it's going to make it much easier to do it once you actually need to piece the entire manuscript together. And then another thing is understanding when your dead time is. When are you not particularly effective? When is that kind of your, maybe afternoon nap time? Maybe that's kind of when you schedule some meetings, some phone calls, and maybe some more kind of mundane things. And so that's something to keep in mind there. Interruptions will basically kill you. 5 interruptions will shoot an hour. You must reduce the frequency and length of interruptions. As much as possible, turn phone calls into an email. And one thing that I completely endorse is turning off the email ding because when that happens, it completely directs your attention to those emails. So turn it off. You don't need it. The email will be there when you're actually available to check it. Okay. Nobody needs a response that quickly. And if they do, they'll probably try to call you. And then if you're me, I probably won't pick up the phone. So that's how that goes. Just kidding. All right. So cutting things short. I'm in the middle of something now. You can always start with, I only have 5 minutes. And then if it's actually a really important conversation, you can extend this. You can kind of start standing up, strolling to the door, compliment, kind of use some nonverbal cues. And then some people put a clock on the wall behind wherever people sit. And then you can kind of start looking at the clock and, this isn't a good time. I actually need to get going. So, all right. This is kind of one piece that I wanted to get to is how do you spend your time? For people that are struggling with time balance, etc., a time journal could be very, very effective in understanding where your time is going and how this is being divvied up. And I really encourage you guys to do this. You will learn a lot about yourself. Monitor yourself in 15-minute increments for between 3 days and 2 weeks, depending on kind of these things. And the thing about this is to update every hour, you know, maybe set a timer. And don't do this all at the end of the day because you won't remember what happened with your day. So if you're finding that you're really struggling in managing your time, the first thing you need to do is document it and see how it's actually being spent. So using the time journal data. So once you actually have this, what doesn't need to be done? What can somebody else do? What can I do more efficiently? How am I wasting other people's time? And the goal of all of this, right, is to have a fantastic work-life balance. And so we've kind of got some pictures of me with the family and with the puppies here. And if you, just for a moment, we've got a video of my daughter, Kennedy, dancing to Lizzo. She's going to be a very good dancer. Very good. Right, so this is all what we're trying to accomplish with this. It's not that I'm trying to get you to be more effective with your time so you just get gobs of research out. Actually, the goal is be more effective with your time so that you can actually enjoy more of a work-life balance and not feel so, so pressed upon and all of these sorts of things. Oh, there she goes again. All right, so avoiding procrastination. Procrastination is the thief of time. If you are perpetually procrastinating, your time management is just not going to be what you need for it to be. And so without a doubt, doing things at the last minute is much more expensive than just before the last minute. And deadlines are also really important, but what's more important is that you actually establish them yourself. So even though something's due, you know, whatever, August 7th, could I have knocked it out a little bit sooner and just got it done and then it's off my plate? And so that's something to try and balance and always be pushing on your own personal deadlines instead of being pressed upon when has something been identified for me to be done. And really, one way by setting these deadlines earlier is you'll find that, oh, okay, I've got a little bit of dead time. Oh, let's go ahead and knock out that thing. As opposed to, oh, crap, that deadline's today. Oh, I was going to get in the lab, but now I can't because I got to submit this abstract for ACS. And, you know, all those sorts of pieces kind of start to unravel your day. So try and keep those deadlines ahead. All right. I know that we're kind of running on. We got about 10 minutes here, and I want to make sure you guys have a little bit of a break. So we've got all sorts of levels of procrastination. And so why do we procrastinate? Probably one of the biggest ones is there's no clear deadline and task. And so this also falls under the idea, how do you motivate yourself to do something? Try and set your own internal deadlines. Inadequate resources can be a problem. We don't know where to begin. This ties into try and find the first thing to start and start working on it. Also ties into the seems overwhelming, no interest. That's another thing to kind of tackle. And then another one that can be really important that maybe Suzanne will talk a little bit about is fear of embarrassment and failure, imposter syndrome, right? Imposter syndrome is huge in research and in graduate school. And the only way to start, one of the best ways to start feeling less like an imposter is just do it. You're not an imposter, you're doing the work, you're getting it done. There's all sorts of ways of managing imposter syndrome, but don't let it be a reason for your procrastination. And then if you're really overwhelmed, sometimes all you have to do is ask. If a deadline's really overwhelming, I'll work with my students, but sometimes you just need to kind of figure out what the roadmap is for your schedule. All right, regarding delegations and ask for help, keep in mind that no one is an island and you can accomplish a lot more with help. Regarding delegation, if you are delegating things to other people, one thing to keep in mind is you want to do the worst job to yourself. If you're perpetually delegating the worst job, that's not going to be a great signature for a leader. And so that's something to keep in mind. And really, very importantly, staff and secretaries are your lifeline. They've gotten me out of more binds than I can count, and always, always treat them well. Regarding meetings, there must be an agenda to keep an eye out for, and so that is very important. And one idea is sort of the 1-minute minutes. It's an effective way to keep track of decisions made in the meeting, who is responsible for what by when. So if you're kind of coming to an impasse where somebody needs to take point on something, make sure that everybody is actually assigned a task that's going to accomplish the work. All right. So regarding email tips, there's a lot of this. Professors are very quick. Graduate students maybe not so much. Save all of it for searching. And if you want something done, email only one recipient. Don't email a group of people. And if you really want something done, CC someone powerful. This is really important for graduate students. Don't hesitate to CC your advisor on something if you're trying to interact with somebody. And nagging is okay after 48 hours. Kind of getting ready to wrap up here. We've got care and feeding of bosses. Bosses are just like you. We are imperfect. It's really important if you have meetings with them, write things down, make sure that you have a clear idea when the next meeting is, what's my goal, who do I turn to for help, and remember that your bosses want results, but we're a collaboration in this and we want to help you with it. And so that's really what our bottom line is. Main takeaway here, kill social media. You're spending potentially about 17.5 hours a week on. I completely believe that. So, you know, don't basically log into social media during work. That was really helpful for me during graduate school. Another important thing with managing this is find friends who aren't chemistry graduate students. This is so important. It's nice to have people that are not worried about all of the same prelims and qualifiers and papers. That's one key thing to help balance and not thinking about feeling bad about not doing work, because they aren't going to bring up the work that you aren't doing because they don't know that much about it. And so it's going to be super helpful. Eat and sleep and exercise above all else. Make sure you take that time for yourselves. Okay, coming up on the end here. So here's a couple of books. Remember, it's okay to talk to your advisor about soft skills. That's one of the most important things that we can learn. And so your action items. So use a calendar and task organizer. Put your to-do list in a priority order. Do a time journal or count hours of television and Facebook or Twitter or whatever, TikTok you're on. And make a note in your calendar to revisit this talk in 30 days and ask yourself, what have I changed? And I think that is all that I have. And so I'm happy to take any questions if people have them before the next meeting, but yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Jen. That was really, I think, helpful and productive. It was for me particularly. So we can take some questions now through the chat. Hopefully we can get some student, undergraduate, graduate, student and postdoc questions for Jen on this talk.
And if not,
we've had a little reluctance this week to pipe up with questions, with some exceptions, but.
Well, I'm trying to see here, balancing writing and physically doing strategies for working against procrastination, work-life balance. You know, one thing I will say about work-life balance for me when I was in graduate school, I joined Taekwondo club. I think it met Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And it was just kind of a couple hours a day, and it was something, or during those days, and it was really helpful in establishing a work-life balance. It was crucial in just filling that time so that I wasn't thinking about work. And so don't be afraid to take on a hobby or something like that during graduate school. You'll be so much more productive without that.
Taekwondo was probably helpful for boss management.
Right? Let's see, or anything else?
I think, you know, all of this information is really very useful, and it provides a good structure. It seems to me, in my, you know, hearing this, that there's a certain amount of like customization and optimization based on individuals and how they're wired. I mean, one of the things I really admire about you, Jen, is that you're wired in such a way to be able to, really implement a lot of these strategies across your whole life. And it's clear that it really contributes to your great success. So I'm the type of person that I'll try something out for a while and then I inevitably fall off of it and it doesn't work for me anymore. So I guess maybe you can address that if you think about, or if you have something to comment on about that aspect. But also the other thing I wanted to say is that there's a lot of content in your talk, and to some extent it seems a little overwhelming to me about, where do I get started? How do I do this in terms of like implementing changes to manage my time better? So if you can comment on that, like, what's the best way to go about getting started so that it doesn't seem so overwhelming to be trying to totally transform my life, which I'm going to fail at in 3 or 4 days?
I think that that's a very fair comment and question. So I think what I would counsel is maybe start with kind of the discussion that I was having about, find the smallest thing to get started on to change that perspective, right? And so I think if you were to do one thing, probably the most important thing that you could do would be a time journal. That would probably have the most transformative impact as far as understanding how you're using your time and spending it to make adjustments based on that. If you are somebody that does not have the stamina for a time journal and trying to document that, right? We all have our limitations. The other thing I would say that you could start trying to wire yourself to do is, if there is something that you don't want to do, or maybe it intimidates you, or etc., get yourself hardwired to start taking that on more first, or / setting internal deadlines for yourself. And so I think that those are probably some of the most important things. Those would probably be the 2 take-home messages, whichever one you feel like is a more addressable thing to implement in your life.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Other things?
Maybe I'll be the curmudgeon. Since I'm very much a crisis manager, which means all crisis, no management. One of the things that you said, which I do want to underscore, is rephrased as be yourself. So part of the experience as a student, and I think we stay students all our life, is learning what works and doesn't work, and basically believing in yourself. So a lot of this is confidence that in spite of everything, you'll pull it off. And finding the right path, may be trying things for a few days, as Eric said, and figuring out that they don't work. And so obviously I envy you and admire you, Jennifer, for the organization. I have a colleague, Eric Anslin, who's tremendously organized, but he doesn't know, he can't remember anything. I'm completely disorganized, but my memory saves me. And so I have a different way. So somebody tells me a date, I can tell you probably pretty well what day of the week it was without having to look at a calendar. So everybody has a different style. And part of this is just getting the confidence to believe that what you're doing will work.
I completely agree with that. And I would say that, up until I became a professor, I don't know that I needed, I didn't need the calendar to kind of keep track of stuff and kind of all that. And it worked up to fine until a point. And so for probably a lot of people here, you may not need the very regimented calendar of I'm going to do X, Y, Z. One thing that's actually kind of interesting, we actually had a pedagogical person, a chemical instructor, come in from University of Michigan, and they were talking about just things that they were doing with their general chemistry curriculum. And one of the things that they found that was really important about learning, and they were targeting this towards Gen Chem, but I actually think it translates to basically any other type of learning, is that the most important thing for learning is figuring out what works for you and basically leaving other things behind. So for example, if you find that, flashcards works really well for organic chemistry, for you, then go ahead and do that. But if you find that you're trying something else and it's not working at all, don't be afraid to say, this is stupid, it's not working for me. So the most successful learners were basically the ones who would try a lot of things and they would quickly cut off the things that were not working for them. And I think that that can translate in a lot of different areas of life. Try it. If it works, great. If not, leave it behind.
I think that's really good advice, and speaks to kind of the problems that I was saying, or the experimental nature of figuring out what works for you. So all of those aspects, Jonathan and Jen, are very well taken. Okay, well, I think this is a good spot to move on to the next speaker. Thank you again, Jen, for a really very nice talk, very helpful. And I'm so glad that we're going to have this as a resource for people to go back and look at in the center in the future, myself included. So thanks again for a great talk.
Yeah, thank you very much, Eric.
And with that, I think we'll move on to our next